Is this the shortest fighting in history? Israel is increasing the fire. Since the early morning hours, Israel has been striking targets in Iran again and again. The Israeli Air Force swept through the skies of Tehran and reopened the skies over Iran for free movement by our aircrafts. The war here has returned, and in a big way. Israel woke up again to barrages of ballistic missiles from Iran, sirens across the country, interceptions in the sky, and an Israeli response deep inside the Iranian territory. Explosions are being heard at this hour across wide areas in southern Iran. According to reports from Iran, air defensive systems were destroyed, and many explosions were also heard in Tehran. In addition, Ashura University of the Aerospace Science of the Revolutionary Guards was attacked. In Israel, they're saying clearly today, Iran violated the ceasefire, tried to stall for time with Trump, and used the attack in the Dahiya neighborhood in Beirut as an excuse. The IDF is preparing not only for one more fight, but for the possibility of several days of fighting, and even for a prolonged campaign. And the Houthis from Yemen, they're returning to attack Israel. Today, we will also bring you how the Houthi naval blockade could affect the world's economy. It started in the Dahiya and also ended with fire over Tehran. Israel struck the heart of Hezbollah's stronghold in Beirut, and something in the Iranian axis simply exploded. So what's really behind the flare-up? Who was the target in the Dahiya in Beirut? Why did Iran decide to escalate right now? And has Israel reopened Operation Roar of the Lion against Iran, this time deeper, sharper, and directly against the head of the axis of evil? And it is impossible to know because just as the area was set on fire, it also seems to have calmed down. In one moment, Iran announced the operations against Israel have ended. If Israel attacks Lebanon, we will act with much greater force. Iran's Fars news agency reported that Iran's armed forces announced the end of the military operations against Israel, but warned that if Israel attacks again in Lebanon, we will respond in a harsher way. I'm Yair Pinto. With me is Mati Shoshani. We are here on Boots on the Ground in a wartime mode, and we will bring you the whole truth about what is happening here in Israel, and also the whole truth about what's happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East. And today is June 8th, so let's begin. I want to open with our perspective from Israel on what is happening and bring you all the facts, not like on the news channels where for every piece of truth there is a ton of opinions, thoughts, and speculations. What's happening here on the ground? So let's begin. Okay. Let's just stop everything and put order into the chaos. What happened here? Is this really the fastest war in history? I'm stopping for a moment and going back to the beginning of the day, even before we reached the Iranian announcement about the end of the operations. Because after Israel humiliated them, struck their air defensive systems, and hit factories, launchers, and headquarters hard, suddenly in Tehran, they started talking about stopping. The regime in Tehran was certain that the American administration's desire for quiet gave it immunity. But its missile attack was answered with a decisive Israeli response. Even without explicit cover from Washington, Jerusalem made it clear that it acts according to its own security interests. In Israel, it is clear that Iran tried to stall for time and avoid signing with President Trump, and therefore violated the ceasefire under the excuse of the attack on the Dahiya in Beirut. In the eyes of the defense establishment here in Israel, this is actually a continuation of Operation Roar of the Lion, with the target bank and the targets of different kinds. The IDF is operating in coordination with CENTCOM and with the Americans, also on defense. The United States was involved in the interceptions yesterday, but the attack is being carried out as a blue and white Israeli operation. The IDF is preparing for several days of fighting and also for the possibility of prolonged fighting. Iran, as they're saying today here in Israel, is trying to connect the IDF's attack in the Dahiya in Beirut to its missile attack. But in the defensive establishment, they're saying clearly Iran is the one that violated the ceasefire that went into effect 60 days ago when it fired towards Israel. The IDF prepared the forces and the public for the possibility that the fighting would resume, and therefore, in the defensive establishment here in Israel, they described the latest moves as a direct continuation of the campaign and not as the opening of a new round. It was also emphasized that everything took place in close coordination with the United States, which did not participate in the strikes but assisted in defense. Hours before the regional flare-up in the Middle East, everything began when Israel struck the heart of the Hezbollah stronghold in Beirut following non-stop fire and the Hezbollah terrorist organization's disregard for the ceasefire with Lebanon. Not another position on the margins, but the place that symbolizes Iranian control in Lebanon. According to the reports, 2 people were killed in the strike and others were wounded, and the names of those eliminated have still not been officially published. But the response of the Iranian axis tells a bigger story. Apparently, the target in the Dahiya was sensitive enough to make Tehran break the rules. Iran launched a barrage of ballistic missiles towards Israel, and the Houthis joined in with fire and a threat to close Bab el-Mandab to Israeli vessels. Israel did not settle for defense. Hours after the Iranian missile attack towards Israel, and the Air Force launched a wide wave of strikes inside Iran. The strike was carried out after, during the night, assessments were passed along in the American media saying that an immediate Israeli response was not executed. Assessments that, once again, turned out to be inaccurate, because in the last 24 hours, the IDF brought Iran back into its long night. Waves of Air Force strikes hit targets in central and western Iran, with reports of explosions in Tehran, Isfahan, Tabriz, Karaj, and Kermanshah. And according to the reports, dozens of Israeli fighter jets went out for 2 waves of strikes, with the main targets being air defensive systems, surface-to-surface missile launchers, and military infrastructure of the regime. In Iran, they claimed that Israel also used air-launched ballistic missiles, a claim that Israel did not officially confirm. What was seen? Flashes of explosions, illuminated skies, Iranian air defensive systems firing into the darkness, and reports about the closure of the airspace around Tehran. What was not seen? A full picture of the damage, fight paths, and exact types of munitions. In other words, the first wave of the IDF strike was tonight at 4:10 a.m., and the targets in it were the regime's defensive systems. This morning, the petrochemical complex in Mahshahr was also attacked, which includes 3 factories. The IDF said that the factory produces materials also used for the ballistic missile industry and chemical materials. Earlier, the IDF spokesperson said that the Air Force completed a wide strike against strategic defensive systems of the Iranian regime. And according to him, dozens of Air Force fighter jets, guided by the Intelligence Directorate, completed a wide strike a short time ago against strategic defensive systems of the Iranian terror regime. The IDF spokesperson said that the Air Force, guided by the Intelligence Directorate, struck military targets of the Iranian terrorist regime in western and also central Iran. The IDF noted that additional details will be provided later. It is important to understand that in the recent period, defense systems were deployed in several arenas in Iran as part of the regime's activities to restore the detection and the defense capabilities that were damaged in Operation Roar of the Lion. Tonight's strike led to the destruction of these systems. And in Operation Roar of the Lion, the IDF deeply damaged the defensive systems of the Iranian terror regime. The strikes that have now been completed help further deepen the Air Force's freedom of operation in the skies of Iran. And according to reports from Iran, strikes were recorded in Tehran, Isfahan, Tabriz, Kermanshah, and additional cities in the west of the country. The first wave of strikes ended, and the defense establishment is now preparing for the possibility of additional Iranian response fire towards Israel. And this brings us back to the big question: Iran's growing commitment to Hezbollah. In the background of the latest escalation, which reached its peak with Israel's strike on Hezbollah's stronghold, senior officials in the Revolutionary Guard and the media outlets identified with the regime published threats against Israel and against the United States following the Israeli strikes in the Dahiya neighborhood in Beirut, Lebanon. It is important to ask why the Iranian regime chose to act specifically now, after all the threat that if Israel continues to attack in Lebanon, Iran will not remain silent. This has been heard again and again over the past months. So in practice, Tehran avoided a direct response until now. Therefore, the central question is why specifically now the regime chose to escalate both the rhetoric and the activity. In recent weeks, the Iranian regime has been dealing with a combination of internal and external pressures. The negotiations with the United States are not moving forward. The economic situation continues to worsen. And across Iran in recent days, there have been student protests and additional protest activities expressing public dissatisfaction. For the regime, a confrontation with Israel is also a tool for diverting the attention away from the internal crisis and strengthening the narrative of the external threat. From Tehran's perspective, Hezbollah and Hamas are not only independent organizations. They're part of a broad regional system meant to serve the strategic interests of the Islamic Republic. When the regime feels vulnerable or under growing pressure, it tends to highlight the security and the regional arena in order to reduce public focus on the economic and the social failures inside Iran. And then after another 24 hours of explosions in the heart of Iran, after the defensive systems were struck, and after Tehran tried to understand who was attacking, from where they were attacking, and what were they attacking, and what even had left to defend, suddenly comes the Iranian announcement. The operations against Israel have ended. Not victory, not a decisive outcome, not a picture of achievement, a dry announcement, almost panicked, with a threat attached at the end. If Israel attacks in Lebanon, we will respond more harshly. And the question here is clear. Is this really a strategic decision by Iran or an attempt to fall with dignity after the humiliation? Because after Israel struck deep inside Iran, after Trump spoke, and after it once again became clear who controls the skies and who only threatens from the ground, Tehran is trying to sell the world a retreat as a position of strength. But in the Middle East, everyone understands when Iran announces that it has finished exactly after it takes a hit, that's not power. That's the way to run away without saying that you ran away. So what exactly did they say? From Iran's emergency command, it was stated following the actions of the Zionist regime in southern Lebanon and in the Dahiya area, with American support, Iran's forces gave a painful response to the regime in support of Lebanon. In response from which the fake Zionist regime and its supporters should have learned a lesson. Accordingly, the cessation of the forces' operations is declared. It is emphasized that if the aggression continues, including in southern Lebanon, much more severe and difficult steps will be underway. And this is exactly the embarrassing part of Tehran. They promised revenge, talked about fire, threatened Israel, the United States, and the entire region. And then, when the Israeli response arrived, suddenly the diplomatic wording began. Not we won, not we destroyed, not we changed the equation, but the military operations against Israel have ended. How convenient. Exactly after Donald Trump spoke, exactly after the Americans signaled that no one wants to allow Iran to turn the Middle East into its playground, and exactly after Israel showed again that it can reach deep inside Iran while Tehran is still looking for the right air defensive button. And meanwhile, the Revolutionary Guards continue to act like petty thieves right under Trump's nose. The Iranians are making millions in Hormuz. Every day that passes, Iran admitted today that media outlets identified with the Revolutionary Guards that it is collecting money in exchange for the free passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz. And in the Gulf, they're no longer speaking with one voice. The new gap towards Iran is being exposed. It seems that Qatar is working with Iran and Saudi Arabia to prevent further escalation. On the other hand, voices in the Emiratis are calling for a firm response against Tehran and revealing a gap between the Gulf states. And the Houthis in Yemen, they announced the renewal of the blockade, centered on closing Bab el-Mandab Strait. The decision brings back the front from the stage one of the most important choke points in the global trade, to which about 12% of global trade is passing through, and a quarter of oil, gas, and grain trade. And also, what are the existing solutions? All the details coming up soon. I'm Yair Pinto. With me is Mati Shoshani. We are here on Boots on the Ground to bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel and about the war against the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And 1 second before we begin, I want to call on you to continue and spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible. Click on the subscribe button. And most importantly, do not forget to look for me, Yair Pinto, and for Mati Shoshani on our social media accounts to get a look through our eyes at what it's like to live here in Israel under this war. And now, our senior Middle East correspondent, Mati Shoshani, is joining us. Mati, is Israel basically saying to Iran, if you turn Hezbollah into a tool that sets the region on fire, we will turn Iran itself into the main battlefield?
I mean, that's a strong sentence, Yair. I'm not sure exactly what Israel is saying. Israel has said clearly to Iran, if you fire on us, we will retaliate. There was an equation that existed before October the 7th, 2023, where Israel would contain attacks or slow, let's call it undermining attempts of its sovereignty, of its protection, of its security. That's no longer the case. Israel has said publicly in words and in action to Iran, if you get your nose in our business, we will retaliate. And Iran, and we can break down later why they did this, they decided that they're going to attack Israel because Israel was defending itself against Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon. And Iran fired missiles at Israel. And Israel said to the Iranians in the most clear way possible, and to everyone who's watching and listening, you attack us, we're attacking you. Iran launched at Israel between 22 to 24 ballistic missiles yesterday. All of them were intercepted. Some of them fell in pieces inside the terrain or the territory of Israel, some by Jericho, some in Samaria, in various parts of the country. No damage that we know of was caused by these launches. And by the way, several of them were, the debris fell outside of Israel or well outside of Israel. That's not the case in Iran. Inside Iran, Israel has struck against Iranian targets that bring in the revolutionary core, money, petrochemical facilities that are key components of the Iranian economy. Iran has a huge natural resources, which is petroleum and natural gas, and the petrochemical industry is derivatives of those petroleum products. It's everything that goes from plastic and fertilizer. There's a whole lot that comes down the chain from that. And Israel responded strongly by launching missiles at those targets. We've also eliminated several, at least one that we know of, executives in the IRGC last night, along with the targets that we struck in Lebanon. And Iran was trying to create an equation where it can threaten Israel and force their policy or their desire on us. And last night proved that's not possible. Iran said, if you attack in Lebanon, we'll attack you. Israel stopped the Iranian attack. We continue to attack in Lebanon, both last night and today, even in recent hours, we're striking Hezbollah targets within Lebanon. What the Iranians need to learn from this is a few things. First of all, is that any attack that they carry out will be responded to with fire. This is not me, Mati Shoshani, saying. This is our chief of staff, our minister of defense, our prime minister are clearly saying to the Iranians, any Iranian attack will be met with fire. Full stop.
And Mati Shoshani is also saying this.
I'm also saying it, but I'm not the one who pushes the buttons. I maybe push my wife's buttons, but I don't push the red buttons that launch the missiles. But to your point, Yair, is we said we will do it, and we did it. We launched a response to the Iranian attacks, and we did so consistently. They tried to create an equation that our attacks in Lebanon would be the cause of their attacks and try to force our hand to stop fighting in Lebanon. Israel continued to strike inside Lebanon. Now is the money time, though. It's late in the day in Israel. We're watching as things unfold. We've heard statements by President Trump. We've heard statements by the Iranians. We've even heard statements by the Israeli government. We need to see if tonight, through the night, this quiet, this whatever this ceasefire is, if it actually holds in Lebanon. And I want to say this from several perspectives. One, Hezbollah, the terrorist organization, has violated whatever ceasefire has been announced multiple times. The U.S. announces a ceasefire. Israel immediately says they accept it. And then Hezbollah violates it. If that happens, Israel immediately goes back to striking within Lebanon. If the Iranians attack, well, then Israel, of course, responds to that. So I think we're right now in this very, very tenuous time where we need to see where things go. If Iran will really keep the quiet, if Hezbollah will maintain the ceasefire agreement, and then Israel will measure its steps. Do we continue to attack, or do we allow this time of peace, of quiet, to continue? It's a very interesting situation. I don't think any of us, Yair, and I'd be interested to hear your take, none of us expected this to happen so fast. We were planning for there to be multiple days of this. The IDF was preparing for multiple days. And here we are less than 24 hours in, and Iran already announces on their official outlets that the war has ended. Very interesting development.
Yeah, that's super interesting, Mati. And I think that it can signal to one reason, in my opinion, and that is that the Iranian leadership is divided. There are multiple people in the Iranian leadership that each act independently. So you have the hardliners, the hardline Revolutionary Guards, that of course want to defend their friends that are trying to train and support the Hezbollah terrorist organization in Lebanon. And most likely one of these people's friends was in this apartment that was exploded by the IDF airstrike in the Dahiya and Beirut. And he personally, or his close associates, want to revenge and defend their people in Lebanon. So that's a major option. And then another option is that there are elements that want to drag Iran into a wider confrontation, an endless war, and to stop them from signing or reaching an agreement. So you can look at it for both ways. One is that they are getting closer to an agreement with the United States, and there are elements that want to destroy this achievement or this closeness in the relations. And then you have another idea that's more personal, that somebody was close to this guy in Lebanon that was struck, and they want revenge. So it can be very interesting. But Mati, I want to ask you about the Air Force strikes of the IDF in Iran. And I think that we proved again that they basically do not have any air defensive systems that can stop us, and we can carry out aerial strikes wherever we want, whenever we want, above the skies of Iran.
Well, was it an Air Force strike, Yair, or was it a combination? Because what we know, and this is interesting, the majority of the reports that are coming from Iran, not from Israel, they claim that our strikes in Iran were missile-based versus aircraft-based. What we typically see, we see footage coming out of Iran and out of some of the Arab countries on the way to Iran of the Israeli fighter jets. What we saw now was reports of missiles coming down. The report says, and we've heard these kind of reports or sources reporting, that Israel was launching airborne platforms, possibly Jericho missiles or other missiles that were launched from Israeli aircraft well outside or away from Iran, from somewhere above the skies of Israel or another country in the region towards Iran. And that would possibly explain why there is no footage or images that came out of Israeli Air Force airplanes striking, at least not close to Iran. One way or another, we're seeing that the attacks were very, very accurate. And I think that's an important point to notice. This wasn't just some generic response to some generic military target. These were specific targets that were pre-mapped, predetermined, in which Israel went after key facilities within Iran that are crucial to the IRGC. And I want to remind everyone, we're fighting a war of financial attrition, not just a military war. Israel, and specifically the United States, is going after the financial abilities of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. That's what we're going after, not just the military war, because we won the military war. It's clear that Israel and the United States, and obviously more the United States, are far superior to Iranian fighting capabilities. But that's not the war we're fighting. We're fighting a war of asymmetry and of financial nature. And the chokehold on the Iranian economy is working very clearly. This is another piece in that. It's breaking down the infrastructure that makes money for them, and it's an attempt to put a price tag. Every attack that they carry out is going to cost them in the hundreds of millions or more in US dollars that they will lose in the future, in exports that they can make, and in the repair costs of the facilities they lost. And I think that's an important message to send, that Iran will pay a price for their attacks, not just Israel, not just the Gulf states, but Iran itself, the IRGC, the ones making the money in Iran, the elite, the corrupt and evil elite that controls the country, they will lose some of their cash because of this kind of conflict. And that's a price we want them to know that they will pay every time they attack Israel.
Yeah, definitely, Mati. And I have a suggestion. Let me know what you think about it. I think that Iran and the United States of America should settle this war in a soccer football match at the World Cup. And whoever wins will decide what happens in the Strait of Hormuz and who gets nuclear bombs and everything. You know, I think that the difference in the quality of the teams between the United States and Iran and the United States military and the Iranian military is actually the same. So this can be a very good way to settle the events. What do you think about that?
Let me just say that it'll be a lot cheaper to settle it that way than by military war of attrition in the Strait of Hormuz. There's a movie from the early 2000s called Idiocracy, in which the US president is determined by a monster truck competition. I
think Trump will win this. I think Trump will win this competition, by the way.
No comment on any residing US presidents. I would say it is a stupid way to decide things, but it is amusing, and that is something in itself. And one last thing to say, Yair, is there's this false narrative that's out there about why Israel started the war with Iran. And I want to set the record straight on that. Israel was fighting a war against Hezbollah, a terrorist organization in Lebanon, paid for by Iran. They're not fighting for the Lebanese people. They're fighting against Israel on behalf of the Iranians. And Iran was looking for an excuse to start a war again with Israel because they want to sabotage the negotiation for whatever their reason is. And they started attacking Israel once more. And I've seen the internet full, especially social media, full of these claims of like, look, Israel instigated. No, we didn't. We defended ourselves. We're fighting against a vile terrorist organization that isn't fighting for its people. It is fighting for Iran in Lebanon at the expense of the Lebanese people. Israel's fighting them. And Iran said, well, I want to be part of this game too, and started attacking Israel. And Israel retaliated to that. The day that Hezbollah ceases to exist and to try to harm Israel, the day Iran dismantles its nuclear weapon programs and stops trying to manufacture proxies all over the Middle East, there will be peace in this region. Israel is a peaceful country, despite the image that people try to give us. We love peace. We love quiet. We love a peaceful lifestyle as a country. War is not in our nature. War is something we were forced into. And people must remember, ought to remember, that we are not the ones who instigated. We're only protecting ourselves in this instance and in all other instances. That's important for people to know and remember.
Yeah, definitely, Mati. That's a great point, because I keep receiving these comments of leave Lebanon because it's a sovereign state. You should leave Lebanon. But we're not fighting the sovereign state of Lebanon. We're fighting, as you said, the Iranian proxy called Hezbollah, a huge terrorist organization, the biggest in the world. Maybe it shrunk a little bit still. I think it's one of the hugest and most experienced one that we still have. And I call on every other countries that want to destroy terrorism to help us fight this terrorist organization. I don't think that Israel wants to be the only one fighting the terrorist organization in Lebanon, the terrorist organization in Yemen, the terrorist organization in Iraq, Iran, and also in Judea and Samaria, other Palestinian terrorist organizations, including Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Well, I know, we thank God that we have the United States of America with us in this war, but this is what it's all about. We don't want to send our forces to fight in any other countries. We want to live in peace, but the only way to do this is to dismantle this terrorist organization that openly state that their goal is to annihilate Israel, to launch attacks, to capture our land, and to continue doing so. So that's what it is, and I appreciate this breakdown, Mati.
Thank you.
I think that this is the last update from today, unless something crazy will happen, but we are here on standby. We never know.
That's up to Trump, up to Netanyahu, and up to whoever's ruling Iran. We're not sure who that is.
Exactly. Definitely not sure. Well, maybe we'll see Mustafa Khamenei on a public show or something. We'll see him face to camera.
I doubt it at this point. I seriously doubt it at this point. I don't know, Yair. He's or maimed or he's not alive. I can't imagine that he would have remained in hiding for so long if he's able to communicate at least with his voice or video imagery. They've kept him hidden for so long. Who knows what his situation is?
Maybe he's in a coma. They're gonna go like, "Hey, Mustafa, wake up! Wake up! By the way, you're the supreme leader. We're at war for 3 months against Israel and the United States. What do you want us to do?" And then he's like, "Whoa, what?" That can be a very interesting scenario.
There's a lot of jokes that come to mind about former U.S. presidents and having to wake them up for the press conference, but I'll keep that for private conversations.
Okay, I get you. Okay, so thank you so much, Mati. Thank you to all of you for joining us, for standing with Israel, for praying. And let's get back to the news, because we need you to help us share the truth of what is happening here in Israel, what's happening in the Middle East, and what's happening in this war between Iran, the United States, and the Jewish state of Israel. Because if you love TBN Israel and want to be part of what God is doing here in this land, we'd love to invite you to visit our official online store at shop.tbnisrael.com. Again, shop.tbnisrael.com. There you will find exclusive TBN Israel merchandise like the shirt that I'm wearing now, boots on the ground. So it's a cool way to help you stay connected to what's happening here and be part of sharing the message coming out of Israel, and also help us create more content from Israel about this region, about what's happening here. We are doing this multiple times a day. So again, it's shop.tbnisrael.com. And you can also find items that are inspired by our programs, Boots on the Ground and others. And every purchase is helping us support the work that we are doing here, teaching, bringing you updates from Israel, and encouraging you to pray for the situation. So whether you're looking for something meaningful for yourself or a way to stand with Israel or a gift to someone, we invite you to take a look. It's shop.tbnisrael.com. Shop.tbnisrael.com. Thank you for standing with us, and thank you for supporting TBN Israel. So let's get back to the news, because Israel and Iran are firing at each other again. And this time, it no longer looks like another short round that can be closed with a nice diplomatic statement. Since the early morning hours, the Israeli Air Force has been striking again and again deep inside Iran, while the Iranian missiles continued to trigger sirens in Israel. And the Houthis in Yemen, they're trying to reopen the maritime front as well. Explosions are being heard over Tehran, Isfahan, Kermanshah, and Mahshahr. And in Israel, officials are no longer speaking about a response, but about a direct continuation of Operation Lion's Roar. The question now is not only who fired first. The question is who will set the next rules of this war. Iran, which is trying to connect Lebanon, Israel, the Gulf, and the Red Sea into one equation, or Israel, which is trying to break the equation by force. So to understand this morning what happened throughout the night, we need to start with the point that Iran is trying to hide behind all of its statements. The IDF has prepared for this. In Israel's defensive establishment, officials say that the fighting did not resume as a total surprise. For weeks, the situation assessments were held, plans were prepared, target banks were updated, and the Air Force preserved its ability to return deep into Iran the moment Tehran violated the ceasefire. And that is exactly what happened. Iran launched ballistic missiles towards Israel, using the Israeli strike in the Dahiya in Beirut as its excuse. For Tehran, the Dahiya is not just another neighborhood in Lebanon. It is one of the central symbols of Hezbollah and of Iran's largest investment outside its own borders. For years, Iran built there its arm of deterrence against Israel. Money, weapons, training, intelligence, missiles, drones, communication systems, and command centers. All of it flowed into that dense area in southern Beirut. That's why the Israeli strike there hit far beyond the walls of one apartment. The IDF says that in the Dahiya, it struck a hideout apartment where mid-level Hezbollah operatives were staying, including operatives involved in explosive drones. 2 Hezbollah operatives were eliminated, 9 others were wounded, and that number alone does not explain the Iranian response. But in the world of Hezbollah and Iran, sometimes the location matters just as much as the time and the name. The very fact that Israel entered the Dahiya again after all the threats tells Tehran, you have no immune zone. From there, Iran tried to restore its honor. The Revolutionary Guards announced Operation Nasser, meaning victory, and claimed that they had attacked the Israeli Air Force bases of Nevatim and Tel Nof. At the same time, Iranian agencies reported the launch of Khibar Shekan ballistic missiles towards the Ramat David base, another Israeli Air Force base. This is a solid-fuel ballistic missile, which according to Iranian data, reaches a range of about 1,450 kilometers. It weighs about 4.5 tons and is about 10 meters long. This is not a weapon meant only to make noise. This is a missile meant to project capability, speed, and the ability to move from missile storage to launch in a very short time. The Iranians also emphasized that its launch preparation time can be significantly shorter than other systems. In other words, their message to Israel was clear. Even after all the blows were observed, we still have the ability to open fire quickly. But this is exactly where Israel answered them in the language that they understand. The first wave of Israeli strikes focused on strategic defensive systems of the Iranian regime. Dozens of Israeli Air Force fighter jets, guided by military intelligence, struck detection arrays, radars, and air defensive batteries that the Iranians had redeployed in recent weeks. In Iran, they tried to rebuild the defensive layers that were damaged in previous rounds. They spread systems across several arenas, restored sites to operational readiness, and tried to close the window that the Israeli Air Force had opened in Iran's skies. Israel did not wait for them to finish rebuilding the roof. These strikes were not meant only to punish. They were meant to reopen the skies. When the IDF strikes defensive systems, it is not doing it for a victory photo. It is doing it to enable the next wave, so that aircraft can go deeper, so that targets once considered protected suddenly become exposed, so that the regime in Tehran understands that even after 2 months of rebuilding, the Israeli Air Force still knows how to find the screws holding the machine together. Then came the most sensitive blow, the petrochemical complex in Mahshahr. This time, it was not only an economic strike. The IDF spokesperson's unit made clear that the compound that was attacked produced raw materials used by the armed forces of the Iranian regime for the production and the export of weapons. The IDF said that these were unique materials, essential components for developing ballistic missiles, and that this compound is part of the production infrastructure of Iran's missile program. In other words, Israel is not only telling Iran, we hit your money, it is saying, we hit the place where money, chemistry, and missiles meet together. And this is an important point. Iran wants to present its petrochemical industry as civilian industry, as a source of income, as the economic oxygen line under sanctions. But when the same facilities produce raw materials connected to the missile program, they become part of the war machine. And at that same moment, from Israel's point of view, they're no longer only an economic asset, they're a military target. That's why the strike in Mahshahr hurts Tehran on two levels. One level is industrial, raw materials, factories, production chains, and recovery capability. The second level is strategic. Iran understands that Israel does not intend to settle for launchers that already fired. It is prepared to hit the places that produce the next generation of missiles. Well, this is happening. The United States is inside the campaign, but not exactly in the same place as Israel. The IDF stresses that the strikes in Iran are blue and white. Israeli aircraft, Israeli planning, Israeli decision. But on defense, coordination with the Americans, everything is happening together. Coordination is at a high level with the United States. The United States assisted in interceptions. The Chief of Staff spoke several times with the commander of CENTCOM, and the Americans were updated. They were not surprised, but that doesn't mean that they were happy. Trump is trying to stop the fire. He called on Israel and on Iran to immediately stop shooting. He says that the negotiations with Iran can still move forward as long as ignorance or stupidity do not get in the way. Behind those words, there is clear pressure on Jerusalem and Tehran. Trump wants to close this deal. He wants to stop the side. He doesn't want this to deteriorate into a full-scale war. He does not want ballistic fire, strikes in Iran, and fire in Lebanon to once again turn it into a full regional war. But here lies the real drama of the last few hours. After a phone call between Trump and Netanyahu, a source familiar with the conversation says that Netanyahu is considering stopping the next strikes that had been planned in Iran. According to that source, the decision may include stopping significant strike plans that were supposed to take place in the evening and overnight. So this must be said carefully. The situation is extremely sensitive, and the decision could change within hours. The IDF has not officially responded to these claims, but the very possibility shows just how heavy the American pressure is. And this puts Israel in a very difficult dilemma. On one hand, Iran violated the ceasefire. It fired ballistic missiles towards Israel. It tried to establish that if Israel operates in Lebanon, Tehran is allowed to open fire on Israel. If Israel stops now, Iran can present itself as the side that fired, observed the strikes, and then forced everyone to stop. In the Middle East, that is a dangerous message. On the other hand, Israel does not operate alone in the world. It needs American cooperation in defense, in the diplomatic arena, and in the event of a broader escalation. And when it comes to American bases in the Gulf, they need each other. So every decision to continue striking Iran is not only a military decision, it's also a decision about the relationship with Washington. Exactly at this moment, Iran announced that it was stopping its operations against Israel. Unilaterally. The Iranian announcement sounds like an attempt to climb down from the tree without admitting that the tree is actually on fire. On the one hand, they say that we carried out a painful response. The operations are over. On the other hand, they threaten that if Israel continues to strike in Lebanon, including southern Lebanon and the Dahiya, much more severe and difficult measures will be on their way. In other words, Iran is not really ending this. It is trying to freeze the arena on its own terms. And that is exactly what Israel is trying to prevent. Tehran wants to set an equation. Israel strikes Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iran fires at Israel. Israel hits Iranian infrastructure, Iran threatens energy facilities in Israel, the United States, and also in the Gulf states. The Houthis fire from Yemen, and the Red Sea becomes a danger zone again. All the arenas are connected. Every local action becomes a regional event. Every Israeli decision has to pass through the Iranian threat. But from Israel's point of view, if that equation is accepted, Hezbollah becomes Iran's insurance policy all over again. And here we need to understand the depth of the connection between Tehran and Beirut. Iran does not see Hezbollah only as a Lebanese terrorist organization. It sees it as part of its national security doctrine. After Lion's Roar, and especially after the erosion of the Iranian axis, Hezbollah became, in Tehran's eyes, an asset that must be preserved. It is an organization that gives Iran the ability to threaten Israel without always standing on the front lines itself. But now something interesting is happening. Instead of Hezbollah protecting Iran, Iran is being forced to protect Hezbollah. And that's a weak point. If Iran fires missiles at Israel because of a strike in the Dahiya neighborhood in Beirut, it effectively admits that the Dahiya matters to it like an Iranian asset. If it threatens war because of southern Lebanon, it admits that Hezbollah is no longer just the Lebanese resistance. It is part of Iran's deterrent system. And once Israel understands that, it can apply pressure exactly there. And at the same time, the Houthis are trying to bring the sea into the story. They announced the renewal of the maritime blockade on Israel and a complete ban on Israeli movement in the Red Sea. Every Israeli vessel, from their point of view, is a military target. Bab el-Mandab is once again becoming one of the most important places on the map, not because it is large, but because so much global trade passes through it. Oil, gas, grain, containers, maritime insurance, ports, prices in supermarkets, all of it connects in one strait. The previous Houthi blockade already showed the world what they are capable of doing. More than 100 merchant ships were attacked, vessels were sunk, shipping companies fled to the long route around Africa, and every voyage became about 20 days longer. In Israel, the port of Eilat was almost erased economically from the game. Now, if the Houthis truly carry out the threat, it will not happen in a vacuum. It will happen while the Strait of Hormuz is already under pressure, while Iran is collecting money from ships passing through the area, and while the Gulf states fear that American bases under soil could also become targets. All of this makes this morning much bigger than one missile barrage. This is a war over boundaries of deterrence. Israel is trying to prove that Iran will not dictate where it is allowed to strike and where it is not. Iran is trying to prove that it still holds the access in its hands, even after the blows that it has taken. Trump is trying to bring everyone back to the negotiating table before the fire reaches places that no one can control anymore. And the Houthis in Yemen, as usual, are entering from the side and trying to turn the Red Sea into a global pressure lever. Now, Israel's test is not only how many more targets it can strike in Iran. The test is whether it can preserve its freedom of action without losing the American support and without allowing Iran to dictate the pace. Because if Israel stops, it will need to make sure that the stop does not look like surrender. And if Israel continues, it will need to make sure that continuing does not push Trump into deciding for Israel how this war will end. These are not headline questions. These are questions of deterrence, alliances, and who truly sets the reality in the Middle East. And before we continue, this is exactly the time for you to help us spread the truth. When Iran is trying to sell the world one story, when the Houthis are threatening the sea, and when every channel adds another layer of noise and panic, we are here to bring you the picture from the ground from Israel in real time. So hit like, share this report, and click the subscribe button so that you do not miss the next updates. On days like this, every share helps the truth travel further than the propaganda. In Israel, meanwhile, the home front is also preparing. Schools have been closed, the air defensive system have been reinforced, and the IDF says that the campaign could continue for several days. The possibility even beyond that. On the defensive level, several layers of protection were activated at the same time, and the air defensive array was reinforced with additional systems. And at the same time, preparations are underway for reserve call-ups, reinforcement of the home front command, strengthening of forces in sensitive sectors, and continued operations in Lebanon to prevent a full connection between the arenas. The meaning is simple. The IDF is not treating this event as a quick ending. It is treating it as another day in an existing campaign. That's why the Iranian announcement about ending operations does not really close the story. It only moves it to the next stage. Now, Israel has to decide whether it accepts this pause, whether it continues striking, or whether it saves the heavier strikes for the moment that Iran breaks the rules again. In the Middle East, sometimes a ceasefire is not the end of the war. It is only the time when both sides check who blinked first. This day began with missiles from Iran, continued with Israeli strikes deep inside the Islamic Republic, touched the Dahiya neighborhood in Beirut, Mahshahr, Ban el-Mabdad, CENTCOM, Trump, and the cabinet that will convene later today. Now the sharpest question remains: will Israel stop in order to preserve the alliance with America, or continue in order to make clear to Iran that this time equations are not written by Tehran? Let me know what you think will happen. I'm interested. Share in the comments. So, keep spreading the truth. Help us by subscribing to TBN Israel, our YouTube channel, where we report multiple times a day on what's happening in Israel to the rest of the world. Look for Yair Pinto and Mati Shoshani on our social media accounts and see Israel through our eyes. And now, let's pray for the people of Israel now, because there are multiple children, all the children of Israel are under they're staying in the house. No schools, no education systems, everything is on hold. And this happened so many times throughout the last 3 years. So today, I want to focus our prayers towards the children of Israel, especially the children of the north, that they'll go through these sirens alarms without being scarred emotionally, and that God will protect them and give them a bright future. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.